Hello and welcome again to another episode of the Fhtf Rhtr podcast. Here at Forgetting How to Forget and Remembering How to Remember, we've come quite a way and we're happy to have you on board. We hope you are watching the videos, we hope you are liking the videos, we hope you are recommending the videos to people, sharing as well, and we're growing this community where we bring Nigerian history back into perspective. Thank you for being with us one more time. Some people carry a certain grace with them. You may know somebody like this. In fact, you may know more than one person like this. They seem to float on clouds, it seems, as if they are being carried by the wind. And when you watch these people, you notice certain trends. It's almost as though they don't try for things. Things just come easily to them. They are not putting in as much effort as most people. Seems almost in quote unfair. But then you are happy for them because they are such good people that you feel as though they deserve the kind of things that they get. In a lot of time, there's another side to this. You see, this grace, sometimes it comes as a result of how restful and how calm these people are. And this calmness comes from the numerous challenges that they have faced and they have understood how to tackle. In other words, they face the good times gracefully and they face the bad times gracefully. In his lifetime, our subject for today, the late President Musa Yar Adua, was one of such people. Musa Yar Adua was the Nigerian president from 2007 until his death in 2010. He won the presidential elections, which were held in April, and he won them decisively, even though we'll just briefly touch on the fact that they were not the best elections ever conducted. He was sworn in on the 29th of May of 2007, and before he became the president of Nigeria, he had served as the governor of Katsina State, where he was actually lauded as being an exemplary gentleman and performing much beyond his expectations or the expectations of the people. He was born in Katsina, he schooled there, and then he schooled in Kefi, and later in the Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria. After his schooling, he was a teacher, he was a farmer, and then he was a businessman. But then, interestingly, he was a businessman who actually preached and practiced Marxism. That's very interesting when you think about it. Uh, as governor of Katsina, it is worthwhile to say that he was known for being a very transparent person. As a matter of fact, one of the things that he did, which was quite unprecedented, was Governor Yar Adua was one of the first people who said he's going to declare his assets immediately he took office. And he did just that. He declared his assets. And he did that even when he became president. But when he became president in 2007, there were two controversies that surrounded his presidency. Like we said, he's a man who seemed to walk on clouds. Grace followed him wherever he went. And the two controversies were thus. The first was that President Musa Yar Adua was not even supposed to be the candidate of the PDP. President Obasanjo had just finished his two terms and had failed in his bid to have a third term as the president of Nigeria. It was one too many requests to ask of the Nigerian people. Weren't having it. And so, ideally, the word amongst everybody was that his vice president, Atiku Abubakar, who was a very strong player in financing Obasanjo's presidential ambition, was to take over and then become the president. But it turned out that President Obasanjo and Atiku had a bit of a problem, I should say. And therefore, Obasanjo decided to pick Yar Adua because, of course, of the relationship he had with the late Yar Adua, who passed on questionably during the Abacha administration. That was a big problem because it seemed as though, like we said, he just came out of nowhere and was handed something that he did not fight for. That was controversy one. Controversy two had to do with the elections themselves. President Umar Musa Yar'Adua is from Katsina State. The other frontrunner of that election was Muhammadu Buhari, also from Katsina State. And as at that time, Muhammadu Buhari had shown himself to have more than a cult following in northern Nigeria. In the election before, he had gotten 12 million votes, and he was looking to repeat or better that this time around. However, when the elections were conducted, it was widely reported that the elections were not free, they were not fair, and quite frankly, they were short of credible. In fact, the elections were so poor that President Yaradua himself, upon assuming office, mentioned that one of the first things he would do to tackle electioneering in Nigeria and create a framework for which subsequent elections would not suffer the same process that brought him to power. So those were the two controversies. But, like we said, grace followed him. And after he was elected, his calmness, his demeanor, his appearance, his attitude towards life in general just endeared people towards him. And it didn't take long before people forgot that it was the questionable election that brought him to power. He, on his part, went straight for national unity, decided to bring people together, and his efforts were so strong that two opposition parties at the time, it was the ANPP and the PPA. The ANPP is the All Nigerian People's Party, which was a big party at the time, and the PPA, which is the Progressive People's Alliance, agreed to join the Omar Yar'Adua government as a testament to his skill in uniting people. Further than that, he decided to put forth the 7 point agenda. Now, if you follow this podcast, you would know a little bit about the 7 point agenda, but we'll mention a bit of them here. He basically outlined 7 things that he felt that Nigeria had to focus in on that will take us to the next level. They included infrastructure, power and energy as the first, food security as the second, wealth creation as the third, transport as the fourth, land reforms as the fifth, security as the sixth, and lastly, education. Depending on who you ask, he either was falling short of accomplishing these goals or he was on the way to accomplishing these goals. One thing we can say for it certain is knowing his character, knowing his person, he was determined to see this through. It would so turn out, unfortunately, though, that he was not able to see them. because there was an elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room was that even before he was elected president, there were rumors and there was smoke because there was fire that President Yar Adua, or Yar Adua as he was then, not yet president, had severe health issues. He had health complications of not just one kind, they would turn out, but they were such that the job of the presidency would not be the wisest course of action for him to take. And this is eventually the long road that led to his death. In 2007, just before he was elected, he joked while responding to a question about his health that he would gladly take on his detractors in a game of squash to show them how healthy and how strong he was. And Nigerians laughed and Nigerians took it in good humor. But as we all know, that was not really a question. When you're in the public eye, especially when you're a public official, one of the first things that people expect from you is a definitive answer to certain questions. Obviously, you can skirt around a few, but when the Nigerian people ask you, are you healthy? We would expect a yes or a no. When they ask you, are you able to carry out your functions as president? You should be able to say yes or no. It turns out that, and to give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe President Yar Adua did not know himself the extent of his ailment, but he was severely ill. In fact, on the 6th of March in 2007, just before the elections, he was flown to Germany for medical reasons. That obviously did not help with the rumors that were circulating about his health. And eventually, he returned and he said that he was fine. Other people had surmised that he was having issues with his organs, his kidney particularly, and some people said he was having issues with his heart. But we need to understand that at this time, because of the fact that he was looking like the front runner, and we need to understand this was a different time. In 2007, PDP was the number one party in Nigeria. It was the largest party in Africa. If you were the PDP front runner, you were very likely the country's front runner. They had structure, they had everybody. So when you won the PDP primary, it was assumed that you had won the presidency already. So people were really asking these questions about the president. They were saying, this man is about to become the president. Are we sure? He did take on the office and he started his duties. But then in 2009, he had to be taken to Saudi Arabia to receive treatment for pericarditis. And this is where it becomes a short story because soon after, as a matter of fact, on the 24th of February, President Yar Adua was flown back into Nigeria, but he was flown back under the cover of darkness. The press was not allowed to see him. People were not allowed to question him. They were not allowed to see his body. And a lot of people speculated that he was being supported by a machine to stay alive. Um, the few people who had access to him, um, because he was receiving many visitors, of course, religious visitors, political visitors, and they would come out from a room where we assumed they went to see him, And they will say things like, the president is strong and he's fighting this ailment and make sure that he will come through it, God willing. Others will come out and say, Inshallah, he will get better. On the 5th of May 2010, President Yar Adua passed on. He was in the presidential villa when it happened, and as is customary with Islamic rites, the very next day he was buried in his hometown of Katsina. But a couple of things or a couple of questions need to be asked. That's one of the reasons that we have this podcast. Because when we have a story like this, we want to know why, we want to know when, we want to know why not. There were a number of controversies that made President Yaradua's illness more curious than just what it was supposed to be. The first of those controversies, was that all along, President Yaradua was in much more peril than was being let on. A lot of people, for example, or I should not say a lot of people, because not a lot of people were allowed to see him, but majority of the people that had access to the presidency did what they were supposed to do. And I must reiterate that that's what they were supposed to do. They came out and they assured Nigerians the president is fine, despite the fact that the president was not fine. And they never really told us to what extent the president's health had deteriorated. Now we can understand that that would have had implications for the market and that would have brought the people down. But he was a fairly popular leader. Nigerians were not indifferent to his predicament. In fact, a lot of Nigerians were praying for him. Religious leaders were calling for demonstrations to show that we were on his side. And therefore, the fact that we were not being told exactly what was going on was a kind of controversy that began to bring up a little bit of trauma from what we faced with General Sani Abacha. But that was one of them. Secondly, there is a slight controversy that the date that we have, the official date we were given for his demise, was not the day that he eventually passed on. Now, this is very sensitive and this is um, a very strange thing to say. But like I tell a lot of people, when you're dealing with a conspiracy theory, it is not enough to tell somebody that the conspiracy theory is crazy. Because the way conspiracy theories work is that they ask you for the official story. And the moment they can poke a hole in your official story, they can run with whatever they want to run with. And for the fact that we knew as a people that we're not being given the whole information or the truthful information about his health, rumors started to fly around. And this has happened a lot of times. So, for example, another topic which we're going to cover here, when Sani Abacha passed on, to this day, there are about 10 different stories about the reason why he passed on. Some people talk about Western powers, some people talk about um, an August visitor, and different stories came out. The reason those stories came about was because the official story we were given had too many holes, and so we could not believe them. The same thing happened when Muhammad Buhari was severely ill and in office. A lot of stories came. Even the interesting story of him being replaced and cloned. And President Buhari, in his humor, addressed it in his speech where he said he is who he is. In this case, a lot of people believe that for several interests and for the fact that a lot of people were not able to, were not ready for the reality of losing a president in office. They kept his death under wraps for much longer than we were told. Now, if you ask why would they do that, that's a very good question. Because first of all, nobody's even saying that's what they did. But if you ask why they did that, that would now lead you to controversy number three. And the controversy number three is one of those things where you say one event occurred that threw a million other events into the whirlwind. The controversy number three was the good luck Jonathan question. You see, one of the biggest contributions to Nigeria that President Yar Adua made was offering amnesty to the Niger Delta militants. The Niger Delta militants had risen up because they felt, and rightly so, that they had been duped and taken advantage of by Nigeria and oil companies, and so they took up arms to fight against their own country. And President Umar Musa Yar'Adua said, listen, we agree that we have wronged you. Put down your guns, and we promise that we will speak to you and we shall come to a decision. It is one of the most beautifully orchestrated attempts at de-escalation in Nigeria's history ever. It was a beautiful thing. They did put down their guns popularly, and President Yar'Adua lived up to his word. He approached them, he approached their leaders and said, how do we solve this problem? What do we do? What are your demands? How can we meet them? And one of the reasons that they were confident enough to think, because when the government says something, you will not be mistaken if you decide not to believe the government, because the government never really does say the truth, do they? Allegedly. But one of the reasons they believed this was because President Umar Musa Yar'Adua had for his vice president a certain Goodluck Ibili Jonathan. And Goodluck Ibili Jonathan was from the Nigerian South South, the oil producing South South. In other words, they felt that they had their person in the presidency. But here is why his this was an issue. Because the demise of President Umar Musa Yar'Adua meant that President Goodluck Jonathan would become Nigeria's president automatically. And that was not in the equation. In 1999, when we returned to independence, there was an unwritten agreement that the presidency should go to the southwest. Therefore, two frontrunners were Obasanjo and Ulufalaye. In 2007, there was also an unwritten rule that the presidency should return to the north. So the true frontrunners were President Yaradua and Muhammadu Buhari. Goodluck Jonathan taking over was going to break that chain. And it seemed as though there were a lot of powerful people who felt that that should not be the case. So when they asked the question, why would they have hidden it? That's why they were trying to stop that particular thing from happening. Alas, they weren't able to. President Goodluck Jonathan took over office, and to his credit, I must say this, he ruled in the spirit of his predecessor and finished and continued a lot of the programs that President Jaradua left behind. The person the personality that we are talking about today is somebody who has many sides to him. He was a man of great intellect. He was a man of great pedigree because the name Yar Adua is a serious name in Nigeria. Is one of the names that when Nigeria when the story of Nigeria is being written, you would have to write down because of what his Yar Adua Senior was able to accomplish with people like Obasanjo in the 60s and the 70s. President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua was a scholar and he was a deeply religious man. With all of these, he went into the presidency with a mandate that he probably did not have before he got there. To the point where a lot of people actually dubbed him Baba Go Slow because it seemed as though he was doing everything at a snail's pace. You could say that. And the reason for that was because he was actually trying to take things slow. It turns out that, as they say, there are some things that we cannot advocate for. And we lost him in office, and it was a great loss to Nigeria as a country. There's a classic Nigerian book titled Igiadubi, The Vanguard. I read it when I was in primary school, I think. It is a story about a young lady who was born supernaturally and she was endowed with gifts to the point where people just gravitated towards her. People liked her, people wanted to be around her, people wanted to do things for her, people wanted to please her, and she would do things in return. She was a shining light to her people. And in that book, Ige Adubi dies very young. The author of the book, Bola Olusanya, writes something, and I mean paraphrasing because I have not read the book in a very long time. He says, "It is not in our place to question the gods, but those who they love die young." That is a tough statement to imagine. But if you think about it, it probably is a true statement. The death of President Umar Musa Yar'Adua was a loss to his family. The death of President Umar Musa Yar'Adua was a miss for his people. And President Umar Musa Yar'Adua remains a gem in Nigeria's scepter that must never be forgotten. Today, the Umaru Musa Yar'Adua International Airport is situated in Katsina, and the Umaru Musa Yar'Adua Expressway is in Abuja, so that we can remember this great icon of a man and the Grand Commander of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Thank you for being with us today.